Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. My guest today is Renee Zavislak, and she is the psychotherapist, at least on podcast realms. And I am really excited to get into a conversation with you today to find out more about, let me start by asking you, what got you into this work? How did you come to be how did you come to become the psychotherapist?
I think that this is not an unfamiliar answer for a lot of us in the field, but I had a pretty chaotic, somewhat traumatic childhood, which taught me to pay extra attention to the behavior of everyone around me so that I could attempt to predict or maybe I had a misplaced attempt to control it as well. And so I spent a lot of time really focused on the dynamics between people in my family, how the people in my family were behaving. And by the time I was a teenager, it was most of what I thought about was human behavior. So I think it has always felt like a calling, sometimes even a little bit of an obligation, which sounds negative in a less negative way than that. But I don't know what else I would do. I have to do this. Around the time I was to start undergrad, I remember saying to a friend, well, everybody tells me all their stuff anyway. I might as well get paid for it. So I did always experience that people wanted to tell me things. As a young adult, I would be on vacation. I remember being at Club Med and some woman that I had never met before cornered me. And within 20 minutes, I knew the entire story of her marriage that was falling apart and the sex life that didn't exist, and total stranger. And this happens to me a lot. Still happens.
My husband jokes that he has "Tell me your life story"
same
indelibly written on his forehead.
Yeah, exactly the same. And a very close friend of mine, I think we were in our early 20s, and I was talking about it. We were out, and it happened, and I said, "This happens to me all the time." And she said, "You know what it is? It's that people can tell you aren't going to judge them. They can tell as soon as they meet you." And I think that quality came out of all of the stuff that I had to confront as a younger person. And I have 5 Scorpio placements. I'm real comfortable in the darkness, right? So I had spent a lot of time already, I think, at a young age, getting acquainted with maybe some of my own darker places and shadow bits and things like that. And it did, I think, get me to a place at a younger age than most where I am somewhat unflappable when it comes to the human condition. So I think that's how I ended up here. It feels like work to me because I'm busy, and I might feel like there's times when, because I'm doing so many things right now, I feel tired, but the work itself doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
If I didn't have to pay bills, I would still do this. I would just do it at home with no schedule. I would just sit out in my
own schedule. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Everybody could just come over whenever they want to talk. It wouldn't look that much different. I'd be having the same conversations. In fact, I think I don't feel like I am much different when I'm sitting in the office than I am when I'm at dinner with friends or when I'm out. I'm always doing the same thing. Just sometimes I get paid for it.
Well, and you do. And I'm going to challenge you a little bit because your professionalism means that there's a level of permission.
Of course.
You bring to some conversations that you don't to others.
That's exactly right.
And
that is exactly right.
I totally get what you're saying. Yeah. You are in the being of what you do.
Yes.
Always. I feel that about you already. And we just met each other. And I get
it's pervasive for sure. Yeah.
So I love that term, unflappable, when it comes to the human condition. What a beautiful term.
Thank you.
And in our audience, we support parents of complex kids and the professionals who support them.
And I support, that is a decent part of my practice, is supporting parents of complex kids. Yes.
I could only imagine. So we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah.
But so here's the thing that comes up for me, because I'm always curious where these conversations are going to go. As I said to you, I never really quite know. And we often start with a question after we ask, what brought you here? What do you think parents need to know? But before I ask that, if I may, I really want to look at this notion of what it means to be unflappable in the face of what's happening, because I think the challenge that the parents in our community face a lot is that they're easily thrown off by what's happening. And I often say what I want is, when parents come to me, I want them to have kind of a bring it on attitude.
Yes.
Just bring it on. I got whatever's happening. I can handle it.
Right.
Because it's when they get thrown off their course, their center, that's when the challenges
Absolutely
aggravate, right?
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that. What does that mean for you?
I think that for parents especially, there are two big obstacles to being unflappable, right? And those are both judgment and expectations, right? I think that parents have, so all of us, I'm a parent, you're a parent, right?
Yeah.
It's like it. Yeah. Okay. Parents have so many ideas, even if they don't want to, about who their kids are going to be, or what their kids are going to do, or what it's going to be like. And the grief work involved almost all parents now in having, especially right now, having those expectations not come to fruition. I think that's a really big piece of it. I think the other is parents, when my son was a toddler, we moved from the Northeast to Seattle, and I was a stay-at-home mom for a couple of years. And Seattle has this very intact culture of stay-at-home moms, and it's all centered around playrooms and coffee shops.
Right.
And so I spent 2 years in that world, and moms are heroes. I love them. And they lie to each other so much. I'd be at the coffee shop trying to wipe the crust out of my eyes, and some woman's talking about how her 9-month-old is conjugating Portuguese and eating with a fork and a spoon at the table. She's not. Why are you telling people that? But there's this thing that has been left over from, I had hoped it died with my mom's generation, but it hasn't, is how the kid's functioning is about how good the mom is. If your kid's not sleeping, you're doing something wrong. I have a client, I adore him. He is 30 years old. I am 53 years old. My kid is 17. His kid is 1. And when I first met him and we were talking about his son, and I was joking about sleep stuff, my kid was like the world's worst sleeper, like superlative level bad sleeper. And my client said, oh, well, our son started sleeping through the night after 3 weeks. And I said, jokingly, I said, oh, get out of my office. And he looked at me and he said, we started right away with sleep hygiene. And I said, oh, you really need to get out of my office. I was like, no, you don't say that to people. I said, we did all this stuff too, but people still believe that, right?
Yeah.
So I
like to call it the achievement elite.
Yes.
Right? It's just there. And a lot of what happens with stay-at-home moms is that the mom, it becomes my job to parent this kid. And so now I'm going to treat it like a job instead of a parent.
Instead of, yes. So I think the judgment, the expectations are big. And I think that there has been so much that has changed between when we were young and what it's like for kids now, that it's also really hard for parents to understand a lot of what's happening with kids. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's a really scary position to be in.
Things are changing so rapidly.
And I think that a lot of being unflappable with your kids involves staying curious, right? Just being in wonderment instead of an expectation, right? Wonderment for all of it, the messy stuff, the stuff that there are heartbreaks. My husband, I don't think he anticipated this, but it really rubs him that our kid doesn't like to read. And our kid doesn't like to read because he's very, very bright, and he has some sort of, he asked when he was 13 years old, he asked for a full neuropsychological exam. He said, I want to know what's going on in my brain. As
most 13-year-olds do, unless they have a psychotherapist mom. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And he had told me repeatedly that he had trouble reading. And because he was hyperverbal, verbal was his thing as a child. He was not kinesthetic. He didn't like to climb. All he wanted was to talk. At 3 months old. He was so verbal, and he knew something was up with his reading. And I one of my favorite parenting mistakes that I'm talking about right now, expectations, and just assuming that I knew who my kid was. He's so bright. He's so verbal. There's no reason there. He doesn't
Therefore,
need reading,
right.
right? And I would literally say to him, no, you don't. He'd be like, but I'm not good at reading. I'd be like, yes, you are. Stop. Right.
Yeah.
So we take him to this neuropsychologist who was fabulous. And she does the full exam. It's multiple days. And we come in for the appointment. And she said, so it's a very complex brain. It's a very complex kid. And I want to start with reading. She said, I gave him a series of 10 words and asked him to repeat them back after 5 minutes, after 20 minutes. And he had a very unusual performance there, one of the highest I've ever seen. He gained words as he went. If he didn't remember them and I repeated them back, he figured out a way to remember them. And he was in like the 98th percentile for that.
Right.
That's our kid. That's what we expect. That's our 98th percentile.
Oh, right.
And then she said, but when I gave him a paragraph to read and asked him to tell me what he'd read, he was in the 6%. He has a major issue with processing written language. And I was like,
whoa, beautiful.
My kid's, he's been right more than I have throughout his life, which that's my point, right?
And they accommodate for themselves.
Yes.
In so many ways. I know I was a kid who accommodated for decades.
Yes. I realized that I was too in different ways, not with things like that, but with attention things, right? And with, which was so common for girls, which is why nobody noticed. We were struggling, right? Because we're better at accommodating. We don't have as much of the age. So I think that even those of us who think, here I am walking around all the time talking to parents about their expectations, and I walk into the same situation all the time. And so that's the other piece. One of the things I talk to parents about the most, more than anything, if I were to say, what is something I talk to all my parents about? It's ego. It's old school ego work. Like, just be comfortable being wrong. Be comfortable not doing it right. If you're worried right now about how much of this you're going to do right, just don't stop, because you're going to be miserable. Like, just get comfortable right now. It's, parents do not like, a lot of them, apologizing to their kids. And I think that it wasn't modeled for us, right? It wasn't, and it's huge. And if you're paying attention, you're doing it a lot. I apologize to my kid a lot.
Right.
He loves it. He loves
it.
They
do. And the older they get, the more they love it.
Yes. Yes.
So let's take a quick break and we're going to continue this conversation. Hi, it's Elaine. And if you like this podcast, you'll love our coach approach. Whether you're a parent looking for support or a professional supporting families, we invite you to download a free guide with 12 key coaching tools at impactparents.com/gift. You can begin using a coach approach to help kids become more independent or improve all of your conversations at work and at home. That's impactparents.com/gift. Welcome back, everybody. My guest is Renee Zavislak, and we're having a great conversation right in line with everything that we're all about at Impact Parents. We're talking about judgment and expectations. We're talking about staying curious and making it okay to make mistakes and being comfortable being wrong. All the good stuff that for us, Renee, in our world, we call it a coach approach.
Right? All right. I like it. Yes.
Foundational coaching skills.
Yep.
And really what we're talking about is what it takes for parents to step into being unflappable in the face of the wonderment that is their complex kids and their complex kids in this bizarre world. I was watching or reading something the other day that was fascinating, because what he was saying was that we are living in the most unusual time ever in the history of humankind, because for the first time in history, we don't know enough about what's going to happen 20 years from now, that we don't know how to educate our kids.
That's right. Yes.
Because the world is changing so rapidly, so fast. So I guess that, and I know that could be uncomfortable for people to hear, but I also want to say to you parents listening, if you're feeling a little ungrounded, there's a reason for it. Like, this is right now, we are living, what did Confucius say, in interesting times?
Yeah.
Well, here we are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about Unflappable, and we're talking about the times that we're in. Where does this conversation go next?
It's funny, when you said we don't know what it's going to look like 20 years from now, I had the full body little mini panic response just trying to do that, because I've worked really hard to not future trip as much as I did in the first half of my life, right? So I try really hard not to. think too much ahead. And when you said it, and I thought, oh yeah, and it just gave me this physiological shock for a moment, because my goodness, I can't even imagine, right? I think that, again, there's a lot of acceptance that comes in grief and letting go that comes with all of this for all parents, because even if I think about when my son is 17, he was born in 2007. It's a totally different, I mean, so different.
He was 3 years old when the phones came out.
Exactly.
Right?
So he didn't even, toddlers with screens, I was lucky. I had a few years before I had to contend with that, right? I thought it was like the worst thing ever that I let my baby watch a Baby Einstein video while I took a shower. I mean,
remember those days too.
Yeah, remember? Oh my
only
God.
Video, no television.
Guilt.
Right? Yeah.
The guilt about that. And then it was like, geez, all bets are off now. But not holding on so tightly to our own experiences.
Right.
Right. Being ready to, like, that's the fact there's a sadness in not being able to share experiences with your kid in the way that, around in this area, I don't know if this is as common in the Northeast because I don't remember this many programs, but there's a lot of alternative high school paths out here in Sonoma County. There's a lot of half hybrid schools now and independent study schools and things for kids who aren't being as successful in regular school. And a lot of that's getting pinned on neurodivergence and the increase in autism diagnoses, but I've got a whole shtick about that we can get into.
And COVID may have had something to do with that, but
COVID and just the bottlenecking of intergenerational trauma over hundreds of years that is now presenting as symptoms, I think, in people.
And an education system that was designed for factory workers and not for.
Oh my gosh, that's the best thing that you said. That I say that all the time. The public school was designed to make factory workers, right? Just it's an outdated model, right?
But anyway,
sitting with parents who are really struggling that it doesn't look like school, what they're in. And so they're not having the same graduation parties that they had for themselves, and they're not having and the loss of, I mean, in an ongoing way, culturally, we have this loss of like tradition and things like that. And I think that's all coming together to make a lot of parents feel like they don't understand the world they're in. And what
I don't want to interrupt.
I like interrupting
because I'm hearing you and I'm realizing. So one of the stories I talk about a lot in working with parents of complex kids is that we have to, as the word you're using is grieve. We have to let go of what we thought was the expectations we thought we were going to have, so we can embrace the child we have. And that happens again and again and again, because every time their peers hit a milestone they don't hit.
Exactly.
You process it again and you process it again.
Yes.
And what I'm noticing now is as my kids are older, my kids are young adults. And so I'm watching their peers and my friends' kids starting to get married. And my kid did get married, but had a very non-traditional marriage. Part of that was COVID. But I'm watching, like, you can almost watch everything go into a V on social media. These kids are so traditional and they're doing it just the way. And then these kids who are going a completely different direction.
Yes. Yes.
Right. Yes. And it's almost like two worlds are happening.
It is like that. And I think even the parents, like, I'll just use my own family. My husband and I are both I would call us definitely lefties and definitely artsy people and non-traditional people and all of those things. And we have been, since long before we were parents, beating the anti-capitalism drum. And we end up with this child who's all about it, is not following a traditional path. And my poor husband is like, wait. I meant it theoretically, but I still want you to go to college and get a job. And I'm like, babe, we can't raise a kid who's not a capitalist, but want him to perform capitalism for us first. So I think there's these ideas that a lot of us are really comfortable with, and we think we want them. Yeah. And then they start to happen, and there's just this. And another thing that comes up, it has come up in my own family, and it comes up often with the parents I work with, is parents getting a little bit jealous even.
Yes, because these kids, they have no qualms about asking for their worth and for demanding parity in the workplace and
all of it. They are not having any of it. And when we were talking to my son about like different options for where he was going to stay in school in high school, and we gave him all of them. You can do homeschool, you can do this school, you can do that school. And I remember a conversation with my husband. He's like, well, I didn't have these options.
No.
And it wasn't, I didn't have them, therefore they're wrong. it was very much, and this is something I've encountered with many of clients, I didn't have them and I'm a little mad he gets to.
Yeah, it's almost jealous.
It is. It's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Straight up,
Yeah.
I've had parents admit it on the podcast. Like, yeah, I think I am a little bit jealous, whether it's something like that or whether it's all of the attention and love and care that I'm giving them that I didn't get, that they're taking for granted because that's their job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that happens a lot with complex kids.
Yes,
And as you were saying that, I was thinking about, I remember being at a place where I was kind of jealous of my in-laws' retirement.
Yeah.
I had young kids and I was working so hard. And now here I am looking at my kids and they have choices. And I worked really hard for them to have these choices.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And yet still there's this almost like hazing quality of what we expected life to go through that we're not holding them to, but then we have to deal with that too. There's so much work for us to do here, isn't there?
So much work. And I think this has always been an experience that parents have, which is, I think it changes the quality of it, but think of having ideas about what you think would be exciting for your kids, but when it comes down to it, being uncomfortable with it actually happening, right?
Well, and what I will say is I often say that I'm a parent of 3 kids, and I often say if your kids are very different, this is my patting myself on the back here.
Yes.
That means it's a sign of a good parent because you're letting them become themselves.
Yes, I agree. Yes, yes, yes.
And
likewise, patting myself.
And my kids are super different.
Yep.
And in many ways and not in others. But there is something about allowing them to go their path, which is what I raised them to do, want them to do, encourage them to do. And now it's, wait, where am I in your path? Right? I want to make sure that we're like, there is something that again, I think we come to terms with again and again and again throughout our lives in relationship with them.
Yes. Yes.
Because they come from us, whether we adopt them or we birth them or whatever, but they are not us.
No, I was a teacher for the first decade of my adult life. And I was moving from San Diego back to the East Coast and leaving a school where I'd worked for 2 years and where the families were really involved. And I was close to a lot of them. And they made me this beautiful binder when I left, where the parents it was those old sticky pages that photo albums had. And the parents wrote things to me on one side and the kids on the other. And I'm getting like choked up just even thinking about it. There was a letter from one of the parents who is now the student is now a mother. Aubrey is a former student of mine, and her mother wrote me a letter that said they had Aubrey was their biological child. They had an adopted child, and I had talked to the mom about the fact that I hoped someday that I would adopt a child. And she wrote me a letter and she said, no matter how you come to your child, whether you give birth to them or you adopt them, you will find that they differ from you in the most beautiful, marvelous ways. And my daughter is such a better version of everything I thought I wanted to be. And I remember that they will be different. It stuck. I'm 53. I was 28. It's been 25 years and I still think about it all the time.
So curious, because I was thinking about asking you this earlier in the conversation. When you look at this issue of grief and letting go, do you experience something different in parents who have adopted versus parents who have birthed babies?
That's an excellent question. And let me think about it for a minute because I haven't before. Yes, I do. I think that a lot of parents who give birth to their children are surprised that they're having that sort of, because you came from my body, I have that much more expectation that you will be like me. I do think that there is that wonderment component is implied more in an adoption, right?
In an adoption.
You're getting sort of thing, right? And I think it would be beautiful if we all went into that, but with that same attitude, even to the children we birth, that we don't have any idea who they're going to be, because we don't. I see myself, usually it's neurotic things and specific anxieties that my kid narrates that feel like they were stamped right from my DNA into his, right? It's not so much the like, oh, he got my something lovely. It's, oh my gosh, that's my compulsion.
Sorry about that kid.
Right? That poor kid got double whammied from both sides, but
yeah, mine too. Yeah.
But I think that it does. I've worked with a handful of parents who have adopted children, and half of them have both biological and adopted, and the other have only adopted children. And I think there is a considerable difference. I think that there's a part of the process of going into adopting a child, I think often involves, I know it does with the parents I've worked with before the adoption, it involves talking about these things beforehand. And I don't think birth parents do as much.
Do it as much. You're right.
I think I don't even necessarily do it as much with expectant parents, or at least I used to not. I do it now because it's been on my mind more, but I think it would always occur to me to talk to parents getting ready to adopt about this idea of before you knew you were going to adopt, when you thought you were going to have your own children, if that's part of their story, what were the things you thought you knew already about your kid? Mm-hmm. I know my kid's going to be like, we talk about those things. And traditionally, I don't think that birth parents prepare for birth that way.
I agree completely. Yeah. I think there's that tendency to just like, we have this story, we have a societal story that it's all natural. Mm-hmm. And birthing may be natural, but raising kids, there's a lot of architecture in there. There's a lot of structure. There's a lot of management. And oftentimes I think that parents of adopted kids are more likely to ask help and more likely to seek support.
Yes.
Because they're not dealing with, the guilt is different.
Yes, it is. That's right.
Everybody's got guilt, but the guilt is a little different.
Yeah. And parents who adopt their kids who are not infants, especially, are almost anticipating trouble because that's what they're warned about, right? That it's been hard. The kid already has trauma. It's going to be difficult, right? And another thing that I think really interferes with parents being in that just wonderment, open-minded place is also something that I know has happened to parents forever, which is that adults forget what it was like.
Yes. Oh my gosh,
so true.
Expect
kids to do all sorts of stuff that we would never do. It's just when I was a teacher and I worked until that placement where I still know the kids and they made me the photo album. That was before that I worked in really rough inner city schools. That was kind of like my thing, right? And those, there's a lot of burnout in those schools more than there are in other schools for sure. And we'd have a team meeting and we'd be talking about a student who had any number of problems at home and therefore any number of problems being consistent in school. And you're hearing teachers say like, well, I don't even understand why he's not doing his homework. He doesn't even come to class. Let me ask you a question. If every day when you went to work, your boss was like, you're bad at this. You're bad at this and you're annoying me. I don't like you. Would you go back to work?
That's right.
No, you would not. Would you eat something that makes you want to gag? Do you know any adult who sits at the table and tries to force feed themselves food they don't want? No. But we expect kids to do all these absurd things that we would never do.
And that we didn't do when we were their age. Right. But we're going to do it better. We're going to do it different. Yeah. All right. I hate to do this, but I have to start wrapping up this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have thoroughly enjoyed it. So
me too.
You guys know me. I could go on forever. We could probably both
We have that in common. Yes.
So Renee, how can people find out more about you?
So the easiest place to find me is on Instagram. I do a lot of free advice giving on Instagram, and my account is psycho_therapist_Renee. My podcast is called Psychotherapist, 2 words, and we're everywhere. Spotify, Apple, Amazon, all the stuff. And my therapy website, I have one of those too.
We'll put it on because I know it's going to be hard to spell. So we'll have it on
my last name. Yeah, but there's a Renee Zavislak therapy. It'll be in writing, but you can find all of that through my Instagram. That's the place where everything is housed. Psycho_therapist_Renee.
Beautiful. We will get it all there. And I encourage you to check it out. I look forward to checking it out.
Thank you. This was so much fun. Thank you so much.
This really was. All right. So before we wrap the conversation, and it's been a really delightful conversation, I think ultimately about how do we as parents get in touch with being unflappable. I think that's really what it's been about. Do you want to, is there something you haven't shared that you want to share, or is something you want to go back and highlight?
I think that everything's so different and so new, and we're used to exactly that, to everything that's happening right now for our kids being new and different. And yet we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of things we've known for a really long time about how to make your kids into whole people that we can still fall back on. And no matter how complex your kid is, they still need the same attention to developing autonomy and initiative and identity and all. Go to the old Erickson stages. That stuff still applies to all kids. And really, it's like old operant conditioning stuff. Just catch them being good. I think if we all switched our paradigm from thinking about the things we don't want our kids to do and the things we don't want them to say and the ways we don't want them to be, if we just flipped it to what do you want?
What do we want? What are you moving
and
toward?
Focus on that. And it's not just our kids, our partners, our friends, our coworkers, everybody. Give attention to the things that you want and stop giving so much attention to the things that you don't want, and everything changes. Catch them being good.
So Renee has just encapsulated the coach approach in a nutshell right there, everybody. And so thank you for that. That was beautiful. And it so reinforces so much of what we do in our community. So really appreciate it. Do you have a favorite quote or motto you want to leave our listeners with?
I do, and I just spilled it I accidentally, which was, I do like to say that my favorite motto is catch them being good. And so what I want to reinforce about that is that it isn't just with your kids, it's with everybody. My other one is the old Rudolf Steiner, there's a war outside because there's a war inside. And I think if we were all doing our own work, if we were all trying to capture that wonderment and dispense with our expectations and our judgment and worked on getting the war inside settled down, everything would be easier. And I really I wish everybody would just try me on that. Just try it. You know what I mean? Because I feel pretty certain it would work. But I think so much of the suffering, it's going circular. It's starting inside of each of us, and it's coming and making these big overarching problems that then cause individual problems. And really it all needs to start. Everybody just needs to do their own work.
Yeah, that's what we say all the time. The change you want for your kids starts with you.
Exactly.
So thank you. Thank you for what you're doing and for the amazing energy you're bringing to the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share it. This was a blast.
It was a pleasure. So to those of you listening, take a moment, think about the conversation that you've just observed and participated in, and maybe commented on as you're listening. Oh yeah, me too. What are the insights you're taking away from today? What's the awareness you have? What's your aha? And what do you want to do with that information? How do you want to bring it forward with you into your week? How can this serve you, yourself, your family, your being as you move forward into your week? And as always, everyone, thank you for what you're doing for yourselves and for your kids. At the end of the day, you make an extraordinary difference. Take care, everyone. See you in the next one.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/sanityschool.